In the quiet suburbs where life seemed predictable, a subtle transformation was taking place. The advent of technology was slowly weaving its way into every corner of daily life. At first it felt distant, like a trend reserved for tech-savvy pioneers. Yet with each passing year its influence grew undeniable. Conversations among neighbors shifted from gardening and local gossip to the mysterious allure of going online. At work, colleagues boasted about the revolutionary power of email and the endless information available on the web. It all sounded surreal to me, a mix of science fiction and fad. Meanwhile, my children, growing up in a digital age, begged for a home computer, insisting it was essential for their school projects. Deb, always eager to stay connected with her friends, began dropping hints too. Reluctantly, I gave in. We visited a local electronics store where I marveled at rows of screens glowing with promises of connection and entertainment. The salesman assured me that owning a computer would simplify life and open doors to unimaginable possibilities. I still wasn't convinced, but their enthusiasm was infectious. With a sigh, I handed over my credit card, feeling both excited and apprehensive. When the computer arrived, it brought an air of novelty and change. The kids fought over their turn to explore it, and Deb dived into emailing friends and playing online games. As for me, I approached it with cautious curiosity, unsure of what I would discover. Slowly but surely it became a fixture in our home, bridging us to a vast, unfamiliar world. When I finally purchased a computer, it marked a turning point in our household. Initially, it felt like a fancy toy, something to entertain the family and keep us connected. Deb quickly became adept at sending messages to friends and indulging in online games, while the kids used it for homework and browsing educational sites. As for me, I couldn't resist exploring the endless possibilities, delving deeper into the digital world than I ever thought I would. I worked late shifts, coming home after everyone had gone to bed. While most guys would go out to bars, I stayed home. Over time, I became interested in stories about cheating wives. I found the ones about women being unfaithful to their husbands especially captivating. These stories planted seeds of doubt in my mind, making me more suspicious of Deb. I started watching her closely, getting upset if she was too friendly with other men. I even started checking her emails and going through her things, even though I knew it was irrational. I remember reading about men who'd caught their wives with other men, and it made me wonder, would I feel turned on by that? I didn't think I would, given my jealousy, but the thought lingered. I mentioned it to Deb once, but she seemed confused. She assured me that she was loyal, and that I shouldn't be worrying about such things. Deb and I met in our 20s at her sister's wedding. We hit it off instantly, started dating, and were married within a year. We had 2 kids, Kyle and Kayla. However, her sister Sandy was known for her wild ways. She'd been known to sleep around in high school, and I had even been part of a menage a trois with her and a friend. Sandy's husband Bob wasn't much better and didn't like me much. I always thought he tried to flirt with Deb at our wedding, but Deb just thought he was being friendly. We had an unspoken rule never to talk about our past, especially with our mutual jealousy issues. Our marriage wasn't perfect. Deb worked nights, I worked days, and we barely saw each other. One day, Deb asked me to fix Sandy's kitchen sink. I agreed, brushing off her plumbing joke. When I arrived, Sandy was in a revealing bathrobe and offered me coffee. She showed me the sink, which I quickly fixed. As I worked, Sandy started making advances, leaning in and saying, "Are you going to sleep with me now?" I refused, telling her I loved Deb and would never cheat on her, especially not with her sister. Sandy tried to use our past against me, but I held firm. She then threatened to tell Deb about what had happened between us before, trying to blackmail me. I told her I wasn't interested, and that if she tried to stir up trouble, I'd tell Deb everything. Sandy mocked me, calling me a stupid man for not taking the opportunity. She even claimed she could destroy my marriage, but I didn't budge. I refused her and vowed to tell Deb everything. After finishing the sink, I packed up my tools and left for work, my mind racing with questions. Would she lie to Deb? At work, I tried calling Deb, but got no answer. I left a message. Deb, I love you. We need to talk about your sister tonight. The hours dragged by, but I couldn't focus on anything else. Around 6 p.m., I called home again, but no one picked up. I phoned Deb's mom, who told me she left with Sandy and Bob. The kids are here with me. Later, Deb called me, asking if I could watch the kids while she went out. I agreed to keep them overnight. Tell her I love her, and I'll see her tonight, I said before heading back to work. That night felt like it would never end. I knew I had to tell Deb about her sister, but I was sure she'd understand. When I finally got home, I saw Sandy's car in the driveway. I opened the door and found Sandy sitting on the couch holding Deb's hand. Bob was adjusting his clothes, and Deb was lying on the couch, drunk and terrified. I lost it. I rushed at Bob, punching him repeatedly, but before I knew it, something shot me in the back of the head, and I blacked out. When I came to, I was in the hospital. A police officer named Jen Andrews was there explaining that I had a concussion and could have been charged with attack, but the charges were dropped. Apparently, after I attacked Bob, Sandy had struck me with a vase to stop the fight. I asked about Deb. The officer told me she was throwing up when we arrived. Your sister-in-law said she drank too much. When we spoke to your wife, she said she doesn't remember much except you yelling at her. After the officer left, I was left in a fog trying to piece everything together. I knew I couldn't stay with a wife who had betrayed me, but I needed to understand why it happened. The next morning, I called my sister Amy to pick me up. While I was waiting, my phone rang. It was Deb. Do you want me to come get you? She asked. We need to talk now that we're even. Even? I snapped. You slept with Bob, and now you're calling it even. On leaving, I added, Amy's coming to pick me up. Deb tried to explain, but I hung up on her. When Amy and I arrived at the house, I told her to stay in the car. I walked up and knocked on the door. Deb answered. Where are the kids? I asked. They're with my mom, Deb replied. Did you get my message? I pressed. Yes, she said quietly. Sandy told me how you forced her to have sex, I said, my voice firm. How could you do that? Deb cried, her eyes wide with shock. I didn't, I shot back. I went over to fix the sink. Sandy came on to me, and I turned her down. She said she'd lie and tell you we slept together. She's been jealous of us and wanted to break us up. Deb's face twisted with disbelief. Why would Sandy lie to me? She asked, almost pleading. Because she's jealous, I replied. She and Bob are partner swappers, and they've been trying to get you involved. Deb refused to believe me, shaking her head. I did it to get even with you, I said, my voice hard. You slept with Bob, so I slept with Sandy. Deb's face went pale. She took a shaky breath. No, that's not true, she whispered, almost to herself. I paused for a moment before continuing. Sandy knew everything about me, my body, the mole on my thigh, because we slept together in high school. I didn't tell you because I didn't want to lose you. Deb looked lost. I don't know what to believe, she said. This isn't about Bob, I said. It's about the disrespect, about the trust you broke. If I had molested her, why didn't she call the police? She didn't because it didn't happen. I told Deb, this marriage is over. You let Bob sleep with you. There's no coming back from this. Deb started crying. You wanted Bob. You used me as an excuse. I packed my things. I'll pick up a few more things next week. I'm filing for divorce on Monday. Ray, wait, this wasn't supposed to happen like this. Deb said, Sandy said we'd forgive each other. I just wanted to get even with you. Stop it. You had sex with Bob and Sandy. I said, grabbing my suitcase. What do I tell the kids? Deb asked. Tell them whatever you want, I said, stepping toward the door. I don't want to see you again. I'll get a lawyer for visitation, she said. I didn't look back as I walked out the door. Amy drove me to a rundown motel while I figured out what to do next. I shared everything with her, and she believed me. I knew she'd help with the kids. The next few weeks were difficult. I worked overtime just to pay the bills, and I rented a cheap guest house. My meals were usually grabbed at a bar or a diner. I saw a lawyer who told me Deb didn't want a divorce but would agree to whatever I suggested. We divided everything evenly: house, savings, belongings. I didn't hesitate to pay child support. I missed my kids terribly. I missed Deb too, but I knew our marriage was finished. I made it a point to attend all the school events I could, even if it meant sacrificing work. I showed up for the kids' birthdays, as long as Deb's family wasn't involved. When I had to speak to Deb, I kept it brief. If things became personal, I walked away. I saw the kids every weekend, and sometimes during the week when my schedule allowed. Deb called almost every day, but I hung up whenever the conversation veered into our past. One evening, I was at Amy's for dinner when she told me that Sandy was still telling people I had molested her. Deb was caught between believing me or her sister. I explained to Amy that there was no solid proof either way, and it hurt that Deb chose to trust Sandy. One afternoon, I picked up Kyle from school because he wasn't feeling well. I let Deb know, and when she got home, I was tucking him into bed. That's when the phone rang. It was Sandy. "What are you doing there?" she asked, sounding suspicious. "Well, if it isn't the liar herself," I snapped. "Kyle's sick, so I brought him home. Deb destroyed my marriage." I hit the record button on the answering machine. "Is he okay?" Sandy asked, her tone feigning concern. "Why do you care?" I shot back. "You tore this family apart. You knew we were into swapping and Bob wanted my sister. If you'd slept with me like I asked, none of this would have happened. But no, you came home, started a fight, and told Deb I molested you. Then you got Bob to molestate her. What kind of sister does that? She was drunk, and you let your husband take advantage of her. And guess what? You can't prove anything. I knew from the start that Deb would believe me over you. If you need to get laid, call me. Tell Deb to call me later. Hope Kyle feels better." Sandy hung up, and I switched off the recorder. Deb walked into the room. "Who is that?" she asked. "Sandy," I replied curtly. "You know the wonderful angel who would never lie to you." Deb's expression sharpened. "What did she want?" she asked, her tone a little too probing. "I recorded the message," I said, holding back my irritation. "She wants you to call her back. But you know what? I'll see you in court on Thursday. Let's call it a day of freedom." With that, I grabbed my keys and headed for my truck. 5 minutes later, my phone started ringing incessantly. After ignoring 10 calls, I finally picked up. "Ray," Deb said, her voice trembling. "I'm sorry, please forgive me. I just talked to Sandy. She told me the truth about everything. You didn't molestate her." "Well, it's nice to hear that, but it doesn't change anything," I said, my voice cold. "In my mind, you slept with Bob and didn't give me a chance to explain. Even after I told you the truth, you chose to believe your sister's version and thought I was some kind of rapist. I loved you, but I also hate you for what you did to our family. You didn't trust me." That Thursday, I took the day off work to sign the divorce papers. I wanted to avoid Deb when she came by. Feeling down, I went to the bar. As I was fixing my drink, I saw Bob walk in. He didn't notice me, so I walked right up and punched him. He went down, and I kept punching him until 3 guys dragged me off. I screamed, "I hope you burn in hell," as I kicked him again before they pulled me away. The police arrested me and took me to jail. I called Amy to tell her what happened and told her not to bail me out. I was going to serve my time. She cried when I hung up. Deb visited me in prison, but I refused to see her. It took almost 2 months for my case to go to court. I pled guilty to attack and got 2 years minus time served. Amy stored my things and told me Deb was sick and wanted to see me. I still refused. Amy said, "Deb loves you. Her family is furious about what Sandy said. She never signed the divorce papers. You're still married when you go to jail." Prison was hell. I was constantly fighting, trying to gain some respect. My cellmate, Keeler, was a lifer who'd homicided his wife and her lover. After a few rough months, I started earning enough respect to avoid being maltreated. Keeler even started talking to me. Then one day, I was shocked to see Deb waiting for me during visitation. "What are you doing here?" I asked, trying to keep my anger in check, though I still loved her. She cried, saying, "I made a huge mistake. I'll wait for you. I haven't signed the divorce papers. I love you." I didn't respond. I just walked away, leaving her standing there at the window. Later, I overheard a plot against Keeler. Someone was planning to eliminate him over a past homicide. I didn't want to get involved, but I couldn't just ignore it. I warned Keeler, even though I didn't want to be tied to his group. At first, he didn't trust me, but eventually he acted. The next day, when the attacker lunged at Keeler with a knife, Keeler had thick books under his shirt to protect himself. The knife hit the books, and Keeler's crew jumped the attacker and strike him until the guards arrived. Keeler didn't flinch. He just calmly finished his meal as if nothing had happened. After that, Keeler and I started talking regularly. In the cell, he was a different person, calm, thoughtful. Outside, though, he was tough and clearly the leader of his group. He talked about his own children, especially his youngest daughter, Angie, who was a lawyer. He mentioned that she was the only one who still kept in touch, but he wouldn't let her visit for her own safety. He was proud of her accomplishments, though, and told me she was doing well. I opened up to Keeler about everything, how Sandy had set both me and Debbie up. "Do you still love her?" Keeler asked. "Yeah," I answered quietly, "but I can't get past what she did to our family." "Does she still love you?" he asked again, his voice steady. "She says she does, but I can't forgive her." I said, "Why?" Keeler asked. "If a woman said she would wait for me, I'd be the happiest man alive. What about her not trusting me and running to another man?" I snapped. "You liquidated a guy over that." He said without emotion, "I regret it every day. I didn't give my wife a second chance. Don't make the same mistake. Holding on to that hate will destroy you." His words hit harder than I expected. Was he right? What did I have now? No job, no family, no future. A month later, Debbie came to see me. She was crying, showing me pictures of the kids. "They miss you, Ray. Please forgive me. I messed up, but I love you. I've stopped talking to Sandy and Bob. I know I didn't trust you, but I'll wait for you." "I thought you didn't believe me," I said. "Was Bob really that important to you?" "No," she shook her head. "I hated that whole thing. I only want you, Ray. You're the father of our kids." 2 weeks later, Amy came to see me. "I saw Sandy and Bob going into Debbie's house," she said, looking concerned. "I thought you should know." I was stunned. Had Debbie been lying to me all this time? I'd been ready to forgive her, but now I wasn't so sure. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. A month after that, Keeler came to me again. "I owe you one for what you did," he said. "I used to be a lawyer, and I know some people who can help get you out of the parole program. We might be able to speed up your release." I wasn't entirely convinced, but I trusted Keeler enough to give it a shot. A few weeks later, I was called in front of the parole board. The governor asked about my prison behavior and my plans for when I got out. I told him I had a sister and her husband who would take me in while I got back on my feet. When they asked about my marriage, I explained that I was in the middle of a divorce, but wasn't sure where Debbie and I stood. They thanked me for being upfront and said I'd know by the end of the month. Back in my cell, Keeler asked how it went. I gave him the details and then asked, "Did you have anything to do with this?" "Who knows," he shrugged. "But if you get out early, don't forget about those cigarettes." A few days later, Debbie came to visit. She seemed uneasy. "Are you going to be paroled?" "What did they say?" she asked. I tried not to show my nerves. She asked where I'd be living, and I told her about the breakup, but I still had a faint hope that she might come back. She didn't seem reassured. I shifted the topic. "You said you stopped seeing Sandy. Is that true?" She's my sister. I don't see her much, Debbie replied. But I cut her off. What about Bob? Have you seen him? I demanded. Why are you asking me that? She said, suddenly defensive. You lied about Sandy, and now Bob is back in the picture. Is that why you're worried about my parole? I shot back. Debbie's anger flared. Tell your lover Bob that when I get out I'll finish what I started, and if you're with him, I'll take care of you too. She stormed out, confirming all my suspicions. I wasn't about to eliminate anyone, but I sure wanted to make them feel the heat. I called Amy, who came to visit me. The parole board came to see me. He said, Kenny and I told them you could stay with us until you get back on your feet. Did they contact Mr. Parker about my job? I asked. Yes, Amy replied. He said you could come back. You were one of the best workers. Thanks, Amy, I said, feeling a flicker of hope. They told me you'll probably be out by the beginning of the month, she added, her voice shaky. A few days later I got the news. I was getting out next week. They gave me the name of a lawyer to meet before seeing a parole officer. I wasn't sure why a lawyer was involved, but I thanked Keeler when I saw him. Don't forget about those cigarettes, he reminded me. They're coming, I said, though I wasn't sure if he had anything to do with my release. When I stepped out of the prison gates, Amy was waiting for me. Her eyes were filled with tears as she pulled me into a tight hug. Welcome home, brother, she said, her voice choked. At her house, Amy and Kenny made me feel right at home. I asked about Debbie, and Amy told me that Debbie had signed the divorce papers after our last conversation. I was finally free. I called Debbie to arrange to see the kids. I told her I just wanted regular visits, no drama. She agreed, but warned me to keep things civil. When I arrived, the kids ran up to me screaming, Daddy, you're back. I hugged them tightly, feeling the weight of everything. I missed you so much, I whispered. We spent a few minutes together. Then I sent them off to ride their bikes while Debbie and I talked. What do you want, Ray? She asked, her tone cold. We're moving on with our lives. Debbie, these are my kids too. I want to be part of their lives, I said, feeling hurt. I was ready to forgive you, but you lied again. You went back to Bob and Sandy. I know who they are. I added, and I won't forget that you lied to me. Debbie snapped. I was lonely. Don't mess with me. I know you slept with her. I'm not going to let my kids grow up in that kind of environment. If I find out they are, I will do everything in my power to take them from you, I said, my voice rising. I would never hurt them, Debbie said, breaking down. But you ruined our family with Bob. I'll keep them away from people like him. I don't trust you anymore, I said, my tone firm. But I'll make sure they grow up right. I promise, Ray, she pleaded. I've changed. I won't go back to that life. Words don't mean anything, I replied. It's all about actions now. I spent some time with the kids, talking about school and their plans. I told them I was staying with Aunt Amy for now, but that I'd be looking for a place nearby. After hugs and kisses, I left to return to Amy's. The next morning, I made my way to the law firm handling my case. I was a little uneasy, especially since I hadn't met the lawyer who had arranged my parole. When I reached the receptionist's desk, I asked, Is Mr. A.J. Brady available? I have an appointment. The receptionist gave me a polite smile. If Brady will be with you shortly, Mr. Harbour, please have a seat. I was caught off guard. I'd assumed A.J. was a man. But a few moments later, a woman in a sharp blue suit approached me, her dimples giving her an almost playful look. Ray Harbour, she asked, extending her hand. I'm A.J. Brady, she continued. A friend of mine asked me to review your case. Let's discuss it. She led me into her office. I blinked in surprise. Why me? Who asked you to help? Ray, she replied. It's not important. I was asked to help, and I did. Your previous lawyer let you plead guilty when there were other circumstances at play. Your sentence was way too harsh, and the parole board agreed with us to some extent. I hesitated for a moment. You're really helping me. But who told you to do this? Her expression softened. My father, Dave Keeler, he's not the kind of guy to ask me to take on cases like yours, so I figured he must think you're worth it. I couldn't hide my smile. Can I call you Angie? I teased. AJ sounds so formal, and you're way too pretty for that. She blushed but kept her professionalism. Sure, but let's stick to business for now. Would you have lunch with me? I asked, trying to lighten the mood. Ray, I don't meet clients outside of work, she said with a smile. It's not a date. I need to grab lunch before I get back to the office. I grinned. If you won't call it a date, then I'll call it a business meeting. Angie laughed. No wonder Daddy likes you. All right, I'll allow it. You can go to lunch, but it's strictly business. We went to a quiet spot nearby, and over lunch, Angie went over the conditions of my parole. I'd need to meet with my officer twice a month, and then once a month for the rest of the year. Curious, I asked. You know everything about me. What about you? Tell me something about yourself. She hesitated, clearly not used to sharing much. Well, she started. I went to law school on a scholarship and specialized in criminal law. That's about it. I couldn't help myself. You're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. And those dimples, they're just, I trailed off hoping she'd take it as a compliment. Ray, she said, blushing again. Please, thank you, but I don't date clients. Okay, so tell me about your career. That's still business, right? I joked. She smiled softly. All right, Ray, I've been practicing law for a few years now. When lunch was over, I couldn't stop thinking about her. Will I see you again? I asked as we walked back to the office. You'll need to come by next week to fill out some paperwork, she said. Maybe we can have lunch again, but still, just business. Deal. I'll even buy you a treat, I said, hoping I wasn't overstepping. Okay, she chuckled. But it's still just business. We headed back to the office after that. Before she left, I held her hand for a brief moment, unsure if it was too much, but she didn't pull away. Her secretary gave us a curious look as Angie walked out of the office, making me wonder if she was different from the usual lawyers I'd met. Back at the office, things were looking up. My colleagues seemed to have a bit more respect for me now. I had appointments with Angie over the next 2 Mondays, but we kept things strictly professional. That is, until the 4th week when she told me it was time to end our business relationship. Are you still my lawyer? I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. Of course, she said. Call me if you need help. I took a deep breath. Actually, Angie, I think I need to fire you. Fire me? She asked, clearly taken aback. After everything I've done for you, you want to fire me? Yeah, I said. I want a real date with you. Dinner, maybe some dancing. I know I'm an ex-con, but I really think I'd like to get to know you better. And I think you might feel the same. She hesitated for a long moment. Ray, I'm definitely attracted to you. But this whole thing feels like it's about ex-cons and factory workers. You really think we should be together? No, I said quickly. It's not that. It's just, you're my lawyer. People will talk. So what? She replied, her voice softening. Come out with me just once. If you don't like it, we don't have to do it again. Just follow your heart. Saturday night, I said, feeling both nervous and excited. I've been locked up for so long, I added. But I want to give this a shot. Let's see where it goes. She sighed, clearly torn. I shouldn't do this, but I'll go once. Don't try anything, okay? Don't worry, I muttered. I can't believe I'm saying this. On Saturday, I borrowed a car from my sister to avoid taking Angie in my old truck. She gave me her address, and when I arrived, I was struck by how beautiful she looked. I knew I had to be on my best behavior, but it wasn't easy. We went to a nice restaurant, ordered some wine, and had a great time over dinner. Afterward, we just relaxed, listening to music. Angie, tell me about yourself, I said. Where did you grow up? Were you married? You know most of my story. Ray, she said, smiling. My parents didn't get along, and my dad's been in prison for 14 years. My brother, sister, and I were raised by relatives. I was only 14 when everything fell apart. It was tough on all of us. My siblings love my dad, but they'll never forgive him. I knew my mom was cheating, so I told my dad," she continued. 2 weeks later, he caught her. I blamed myself for what happened. I reached across the table, touching her hand. "Angie, you were just a kid. You couldn't have known what would happen." After that, I decided to study law, hoping I could help my dad. She said I went into criminal law, but his case was already beyond saving. He's proud of me, though. "Have you been married?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Yes, but it didn't last long," she said, her smile tight. "And it's really none of your business." "Fair enough," I said, laughing softly. "Ray, can we talk about this some other time? I'm having a great time right now. Want to dance? I have 2 left feet, but that's a good excuse to hold you close," I said with a grin. We moved onto the dance floor, swaying slowly to the music. Her perfume enveloped me and I felt my heart race. "Ray," she said softly, "I don't date much. It's hard for me to trust men, especially because of the people I associate with. If my dad hadn't sent you to me, I wouldn't be here right now." "Don't worry," I joked. "I'll send him an extra pack of cigarettes for this. You're the nicest thing that's happened to me, Ray," she said, her eyes softening. "I'll do anything to earn your trust." When I dropped her off, I kissed her gently at the door. She kissed me back, but then pulled away. "Can I come in?" I asked, suddenly feeling unsure of myself. "No, Ray," she said, her voice steady but soft. "It's too soon." "Next Saturday?" I asked, hopeful. "Maybe," she said, offering a small smile. "Call me Thursday." I felt a sense of happiness as I headed home that day. We saw each other again the following Saturday and the one after that. And each time, Angie opened up a little more about her past. "Ray, I want to be honest with you," she said one afternoon. "I got married in college to my boyfriend, but we were way too young. I had a pregnancy loss. We divorced, and I kept the Brady name because my dad insisted on it. I appreciated her trust in sharing that with me. She asked about my kids, and I mentioned that they were eager to meet her, especially my daughter, who asked about Angie all the time. "Would you like to meet my family at a barbecue next Saturday?" I asked her. I know it's a big step, but it would mean a lot to me. Angie hesitated for a moment, then kissed me. A kiss that felt different, deeper. After pulling back, she nodded. "Okay, Ray, I'll come." I smiled, still unsure about how to behave at a family gathering. "I'll have Amy give you a call," I said, feeling a little nervous. When I told Amy Angie was coming to the party, it was like the whole family wanted to be there. The list of attendees grew, and suddenly everyone was eager to meet the new woman in my life. My parents, cousins, aunts, and uncles were all excited. Angie offered to bring potato salad, and I remember Amy mentioning how sweet Angie's voice sounded when she called. I think Amy was hoping something would develop between us, and honestly, I was beginning to hope the same. Every weekend I still picked up my kids from Deb's house. Afterward, I'd take them to Amy's or out somewhere fun. I'd ask about their mom, but I always tried to keep it polite. Kyle mentioned that their mom had a new boyfriend, which initially worried me. But then Kayla told me it was a school teacher named Pat. He taught health classes and was also the soccer coach. I asked Deb about him. "I'm trying to turn my life around, Ray," she said. "Pat's a good guy. His wife passed away from leukemia a couple of years ago, and he moved here to start fresh. He's got a 15-year-old daughter, and Kyle and Kayla really like her." I nodded. "I just want to say this, Deb. Your lies and cheating ruined our relationship. If you really care about Pat, treat him right, and above all, be honest with him. Don't make the same mistakes you made with me," she sighed. "Pat loves the kids. He knows you're their father, and he's okay with that. I hope it works out for all of us. I hope I haven't messed things up for you with other women." "You're a good man, Ray," Deb said softly. "And I know you'll find someone right for you. I'm sorry for everything I put you through." With that, I said goodbye and drove back home. I found a small 2-bedroom apartment about a mile away from Deb and the kids' place. I wanted a space where they could stay when they visited. I still stopped by Amy's a few times a week, mostly for meals, but also because I enjoyed the visits. The day of the barbecue, I was on edge. I stood outside waiting for Angie to arrive. I felt a wave of relief when I saw her car pull up. She smiled at me holding a bowl in her hands. "Potato salad, and you better eat some," she said, teasing me with a grin. She looked stunning. Honestly, she could never look bad in my eyes. Being around her felt like everything was falling into place. I was already in love with her, even though we hadn't done more than kiss. You just know when something's right. All I hoped was that she felt the same. I introduced Angie as my good friend to everyone. And when I brought her over to meet my parents, she greeted them with a smile and a warm hug. My dad, with his usual bluntness, turned to me and said right in front of her, "Don't worry, Ray, we already love her, and we don't even know her yet." Angie looked at me, smiling. I took that as a good sign. When I introduced her to Amy, the two of them exchanged a look. "Ray, I never told you this before," Amy said, "but I met your sister when I was working on your parole. I didn't mention it before because it never came up. But now that we're all in the same circle, I wanted to be up front. I told you I wouldn't lie to you, and that's why I'm saying it now." I was surprised. I had no idea. Amy went on. "I hadn't talked to her since then, until she called me about the potato salad. Is there anyone else I should know about?" I nodded. "Yeah, I've spoken to Deb, your ex-wife, and I'd also talked to Sue and Bob, your boss. I made sure you'd have a job after everything with the bar fight and the police. I did all that as your attorney, but I never expected to fall for you, Angie. I didn't even know you." Angie paused, looking conflicted. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you about all of this, Ray, but honestly, I shouldn't have. You were my client, and I had to know the truth before I could fully support you. If you want me to leave now, I'll go." "I understand." "Leave," I repeated, heart pounding. "You just said you were in love with me, and that's all I needed to hear." Before she could say anything else, I grabbed her, kissed her, and then pulled her into a hug. I introduced her to the rest of the family, then told Angie I'd be back in a few minutes. The kids were eager to meet her. When I returned, Kayla was the first to approach Angie. "Hi, I'm Kayla," she said, her voice shy but eager. "Are you Daddy's girlfriend? You're really pretty, just like Daddy says." Angie smiled. "Hi, Kayla. You can call me Angie or AJ if you want. You're a very pretty girl, too." "It's really nice to meet you." Kayla grinned, then added, "Come meet my brother. He's 10, and he's afraid of girls." I laughed. "Kyle, this is AJ, Daddy's friend." I saw Kyle shyly shake Angie's hand, then watch as she knelt down to talk to them at their level. It was clear they were hitting it off, and I couldn't help but feel proud. I joined them and Kyle looked up at me. "We like her, Daddy," he said, surprising me. "She's pretty and sweet." Once again, Angie just looked at me and smiled. The barbecue had been a great time, and as the evening came to a close, I found myself talking to her when Kyle and Kayla approached. "Dad," Kyle started, "remember how you said we're going to the amusement park in 2 weeks? Can Angie come with us? That way, when Kayla and I are on the rides, you'll have someone to hang out with." I tried to explain to him that those kinds of questions were better asked privately. Maybe Angie had other plans, or maybe she wasn't into amusement parks. Kyle turned to Angie and apologized. "Sorry, Angie," he said. "I didn't mean to assume you'd want to go." Angie laughed softly and crouched down to his level. "Honey, what your dad means is that you should ask him those things, not me. But as for the amusement park, I love them, and I'd be thrilled to go. And if your dad's okay with it, maybe I can ride the roller coaster with you." Of course, we all ended up going to the amusement park. The kids rode everything they could, and Angie kept her word, taking Kyle on the roller coaster and the Ferris wheel. On the way home, Kayla made an observation. "Dad, you need to buy a car. Your truck isn't big enough for all of us. You can't expect Angie to keep using her car all the time." Angie and I laughed, but Kayla had a point. The next couple of weeks were a little quieter. I worked a couple of weekends, and Angie had court commitments. We talked on the phone a few times, but it wasn't the same as seeing each other in person. One Saturday, I picked up the kids and we decided to go to Chuck E. Cheese's for some pizza and games. While we were at the house, Kayla asked if she could call Angie to invite her to come along. Not wanting to let her down, I agreed to make the call. I dialed Angie's number and spoke first. "Hey, Angie, it's Ray. Kayla wanted me to ask you what you're doing tonight." "Oh, hey Ray," Angie replied. "I was planning to go out with some friends." "Why?" "Nothing, just checking." "Have fun," I said. "Wait," Angie said. "You said Kayla wanted to ask me something. Can you put her on the phone?" I handed the phone to Kayla and listened to her side of the conversation. "Hi, Angie," Kayla said cheerfully. "Dad's taking Kyle and me to Chuck E. Cheese's for pizza and games. We were wondering if you'd like to come with us." "Sure, I'll come. I'll tell him. We miss you too." "See you soon," Angie replied. When I got the phone back, I couldn't help but feel a little bad. "Sorry, honey," I said, "but she's already got plans." Kayla was confused. "What do you mean, Dad?" "She said she'd be here in half an hour. She's going to buy a car so she doesn't always have to use her own." Kyle chimed in too. "Yeah, Daddy, she said she misses us." After the pizza party where the kids won a bunch of stuffed animals thanks to Angie's game skills, I dropped them off at Deb's house. That night, Angie suggested we spend some more time getting to know each other. We went to my apartment and sat on the couch. My heart was racing as I looked at her and said, "Angie, you know I love you, right? I wouldn't be here if I didn't mean it. I want us to be together." She looked at me, a mixture of vulnerability and trust in her eyes. "I haven't trusted anyone in a long time." She said softly, "All I ask is that you be gentle. I don't want to be used. I want to feel loved." We moved to the bedroom, taking our time and savoring each other's company. I gave her a relaxing foot massage, shared a playful moment tasting the whipped cream she had smeared on her belly, and we spent hours simply enjoying each other's presence. The most special part was holding her afterward, feeling the closeness and connection. She stayed the night. I woke up early and made French toast. When Angie came out of the bedroom wearing one of my t-shirts, I couldn't help but smile. "I can't believe how great you look." Even in the morning, she smiled, took a quick shower, and we sat down to talk. "Angie, what comes next for us?" I asked, genuinely curious. "I love you, my kids love you, and my whole family is crazy about you. What do you want for the future?" She laughed lightly. "Ray, I sound like a lawyer." She said, "We've only known each other for a few months. Then last night was our first time together. But that's enough, right? I know it's been short, but I want you in my life every day," I said, my voice full of conviction. "And if we haven't made love enough yet, we can go back to the bedroom and spend the whole day there." Angie smiled warmly. "Ray, I want to marry you. Will you marry me?" Her eyes filled with tears. "Ray, I don't take love lightly. I made a mistake once. But yes, I will marry you. I will always be there for you and your kids. I'll always be honest and I'll never cheat. I expect the same from you." She came over and kissed me deeply. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" I asked, noticing a mix of emotions on her face. "You look happy, but also sad." She took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about my dad. Most girls dream of their wedding day, how their father will walk them down the aisle and give them away. I know that won't happen for me. And it makes me sad." She wiped her eyes. "The last time I got married, my dad didn't even know about it. By the time I told him, I had already miscarried and was getting a divorce." I reached out and held her. "I'm sorry, Angie," she whispered, trying to smile through her tears. I shouldn't be thinking about this right now. I'm going to marry the man I love. The man who I know is perfect for me. What? I asked, surprised. You loved me from the start. She smiled softly. From the first moment I saw you, I wanted you. I think you knew that. I smiled back, feeling overwhelmed by her honesty. When do you want to get married? She asked gently. Any time, I replied. It'll be on your terms. We both agreed that we wanted the wedding to happen as soon as possible. I asked Angie if I could start telling people, and she agreed, saying she would handle it on her end as well. The only thing left to decide was the date. After some discussion, we settled on 2 months from now. For the next few days, I was on cloud 9. I couldn't wait to share the news, so I called Amy and her husband Kenny. They were both thrilled for us. I also needed to tell the kids, so I called their house and set up a conference call. When they heard the news, they both screamed with excitement, expressing how happy they were and how much they liked Angie. I told them the wedding would take place in a couple of months, and that they were among the first to know. One day, I went to Angie's office to check in with her, and Mary, her secretary, congratulated me. I mentioned that Angie had already told everyone, and had invited everyone to the wedding reception. Mary called Angie, and I was told to come in. When I walked into her office, Angie was sitting there quietly crying. Angie, what's wrong? I asked, rushing over to her. She looked up at me with tears in her eyes. I called the prison, she said, her voice trembling. I asked the warden if my dad could be granted a day off to come to our wedding. He told me it's not possible. Since my dad is serving a life sentence, he's not allowed to leave. He said there's nothing he can do. Angie wiped her eyes and I wrapped my arms around her. I'm so sorry, Angie, I said, feeling my heart break for her. I know how much your father means to you. She gave me a sad smile. Ray, it's worse than I thought. Dad's cancer, which had been in remission, is back. They've given him only 3 to 6 months to live. She started crying again, and I held her close, wishing I could take her pain away. As I held her, I silently thought to myself, why is this happening to her? She deserves so much better. I kissed the top of her head and whispered, Angie, I've been sending your father cigarettes ever since I got out. It's something I promised him. I'm so sorry, she whispered through her tears. It's not your fault, I reassured her. Your dad doesn't smoke anymore. He uses the cigarettes people send him to trade with the other inmates. He didn't do this to himself. I didn't want to upset her any more than she already was, but I had an idea. I kissed her goodbye and told her I'd see her the next day, though I didn't yet share my plan. The next morning I called in sick to work and went to visit the prison. I needed to speak directly with Keeler and the warden. When Keeler saw me, he greeted me with a warm smile. You take good care of my girl, Ray, he said. All I ask is that you make her happy. She deserves the world. I explained my plan to Keeler, but at first he rejected it. After some convincing, he finally agreed, but only on the condition that I could persuade the warden. I thanked Keeler and headed to the warden's office. When I arrived, the warden nodded in greeting. Well, Ray, I hear you're getting married, he said. I'm sorry about Keeler's situation, but you know, he's a lifer. We can't make exceptions for family events like weddings. Warden, I said, how much authority do you have over the prison? Can you make decisions about what happens here? He raised an eyebrow. Depends on what you're asking, she replied. I'm asking if we can get married on the prison grounds, I explained. We could use the chapel, and Keeler could walk his daughter down the aisle. You want to have a wedding in prison, just so her father can be there? He asked, sounding incredulous. Yes, sir, I said firmly. Angie hasn't seen her father in 14 years, and now he's dying. All we're asking is to use the chapel for the ceremony. I know there have been weddings here before. The warden paused, clearly weighing my request. Finally, he nodded slowly. All right, Ray, I'll make it happen, he said. But it won't be a big affair. You can invite 3 outsiders besides yourself and your fiancé. Keeler can invite a few inmates, and you'll need to use a prison attendant to officiate the ceremony." Relief washed over me. "Thank you, Warden," I said, genuinely grateful before leaving to share the news with Keeler. When I found him, I smiled and said Dave, using his nickname. He chuckled at the familiar tone. The warden agreed to my idea. I continued, "I'm heading back to tell Angie the good news." Keeler's expression softened. "Thanks, Ray," he said. "I know it'll mean the world to her." Before I left, Keeler gave me a piece of advice. "Here's a number for Angie," he said. "When she goes to the bank, have her ask for her birth certificate. The account is still in her maiden name." I wrote down the number and made sure to tell him how sorry I was about his illness. "Just take care of my girl," Dave said. "That's all I want." I headed back to Angie's office. She saw the smile on my face and immediately asked, "What's going on? What's the good news?" "I was wondering how you'd feel about getting married in prison," I said, teasing her a little. "What are you talking about?" she asked, confused. I explained everything, how I'd spoken with the warden, and how her father would be allowed to walk her down the aisle. She started crying, but this time they were tears of joy. "Oh my God, I love you so much, Ray." Afterward, I told her about the safety deposit box, and we went to check it out. At the bank, Angie approached the clerk. "I'm Angelina Juanita Miller, and I'd like to see my safety deposit box," she said. She handed over her birth certificate, and the clerk led us to the box. He opened it, then stepped outside to give us some privacy. The first thing we found was a note from her father. "Dear Angie, if you're reading this, it means you're either getting married or I've already passed. I hope it's the former. Inside the box, you'll find your mother's engagement ring. I know people wondered where it went. I kept it safe for you. She wasn't perfect, but she loved you. And I know she would have wanted you to have her ring. There are also bonds worth over $15,000 to help pay for your wedding. I arranged this before I was incarcerated. When you see Brad and Lisa, tell them there's a box for each of them too. Only yours contains a ring. Congratulations, and always be honest with your husband. With love, Daddy." As we discussed our wedding plans, we decided to invite Angie's brother Brad and her sister Lisa along with my sister Amy. The reception would be for family and friends after the ceremony. Angie and Amy worked tirelessly over the next month to prepare everything, even though we had to rush to pay for everything at the last minute. I wanted Angie to have the wedding she had always dreamed of. Amy volunteered to take pictures with her digital camera, ensuring we have memories of the day. One day, Angie and I visited her brother and sister. She introduced me to them, and they both explained that they didn't hate their father. What they hated was what he'd done. Angie told them about the wedding at the prison, how her father was dying, and how much it meant to her to have him there. Brad and Lisa were moved to tears when they learned their father's condition. After hearing everything, they agreed to attend the wedding. Angie gave them the numbers for their bank safety deposit boxes, and they were shocked to learn that their father had left something for each of them as well. On the day of the wedding, Angie and I drove to the prison together, with Amy and her husband following in their car. Amy's husband stayed in the car while Angie and I went inside. I'd arranged a suit for Keeler, and one of the guards took it to him. I was dressed in the tuxedo I had rented for the occasion. Amy went with Angie to help her with her wedding dress, as Angie didn't want me to see her until she walked down the aisle. I waited for her in the chapel. Brad and Lisa arrived, and I couldn't help but smile. Brad was my best man, and Lisa would be Angie's maid of honor. The chapel had a small piano, and one of Keeler's friends and inmate was playing some soft tunes. The guard escorted in 5 other inmates who were close to Keeler, and they took their seats. The warden entered with the priest, smiling at me as he approached. "After the ceremony, we'll have cake and punch," he said. For a prison warden, he wasn't too bad. The music swelled as the pianist played, "Here Comes the Bride," and everyone rose to their feet. Angie appeared at the door, walking down the aisle with her father. Both of them had tears in their eyes. Angie's wish had come true. Her father was there to walk her down the aisle. As they reached the front of the chapel, the small wedding party stayed standing, and a guard closed the door behind them. The priest asked, "Who gives this woman to this man?" "I do," Dave replied proudly before sitting down. "Angelina Juanita Miller Brady, do you take Raymond Michael Harper to be your husband?" The priest asked Angie, then turned to me. We both answered, "I do." We made sure to say our vows, pledging to love and honor each other. From that moment on, we knew we'd face everything together. After I said my vows, I kissed Angie, and then she turned to kiss and hug her father. We moved to a nearby room to enjoy cake and punch, provided by the warden. Brad and Lisa went over to their father, and for the first time in nearly 15 years, they spoke with him. There were many tears, some of joy, others of regret. They wanted their father to know they still loved him. Emmy took photos of Angie and me during the ceremony, capturing many heartfelt moments, especially between Dave and his children. Laughter, tears, and embraces filled the room. Afterward, Amy and her husband went to a 24-hour photo center to develop the pictures. They had them enlarged and made copies, so each family could take home a set. Brad and Lisa, along with their children, came by to pick up their pictures. They showed their kids Dave's photo and said, "This is your grandfather." Amy had taken 4 sets of photos. After the reception, each family received one for Angie and me, one for Amy, and one for Brad and Lisa. Angie looked stunning in her wedding dress. If she had wings, she would have looked like an angel. To me, she was the most beautiful woman in the world, and now she was my wife. We danced, ate, and danced some more, sharing kisses and laughter. People who knew me at work told me I was a lucky man, but I didn't need anyone to tell me. I already knew. I had the ring, and I wasn't letting go of it. Some people might wonder why Deba and Pat didn't come to our wedding. It was Angie's day, and I didn't want anything to ruin it. Seeing Angie walk down the aisle with her father, watching her brother and sister reconcile with him, those moments are etched in my memory forever. 6 months have passed since that special day. When Pat got married last month, I'm glad to see she's trying to get her life back on track, and my kids say Pat is treating them well. I also asked about Aunt Sue and Uncle Bob, and my kids said they'd moved out of state. I was moved to the day shift at work so I could spend more time with Angie and the kids. Angie was pregnant with our child, and 3 months after our wedding, Dave Keeler passed away. The kids had visited him every month, and it was hard. But we got to tell him about Angie's pregnancy. We shared that it was going to be a boy, and we planned to name him David Raymond. That news brought a smile to Dave's face. Looking back, I can't believe how much has happened. My cheating wife, the prison, finding Angie, and then marrying her. Now we're starting over, and I'm about to be a father again. Not a day goes by that I don't thank God for the second chance Angie and I have been given. For everything we've been through, we have each other, and that's more than I ever expected. Life moved forward in a way I never thought possible. Angie and I settled into our rhythm as newlyweds, navigating the joys and challenges of blending families. The kids adored her, and as the months passed, Kyle and Keeler seemed to blossom under her gentle care. They were just as excited as we were about the arrival of their baby brother, often arguing over who would hold him first. Work kept me busy, but coming home to Angie and the kids made every long day worth it. The house was filled with laughter and warmth, a stark contrast to the darker days that had once defined my life. I still thought about Deb occasionally, mostly because of the kids, but our conversations remained civil and focused on co-parenting. Pat seemed to be a steady presence in her life, and I silently hoped she'd found the peace she'd once lacked. When David Raymond was born, he came into the world with a wail that seemed to declare he was ready to take on anything. Holding him in my arms for the first time, I was struck by how life had a way of healing even the deepest wounds. Angie's smile, as she watched us, made everything feel complete. We visited Dave Keeler's grave on what would have been his 65th birthday, bringing David along to meet his grandfather. Angie placed flowers on the headstone, her eyes glistening with tears, while I held her close. "He would have been so proud of you," I whispered. As the seasons passed, the pain of the past faded into a distant memory, replaced by the love we'd built together. Angie and I weren't perfect, no one is, but we were perfect for each other, and that, I realized, was enough. Looking back, I know life could have taken a very different turn. But here I was, standing on the porch of our home, watching Angie chase the kids around the yard, while David cooed in my arms. For the first time in years, I felt like I'd finally come home. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.